I said it before and I'll say it again. Francis Ngannou is overpaid. The PFL is losing money on the Francis Ngannou deal, and that is why it's an L deal. For Francis, it's great. For Francis, yeah, rake in all the money you can. 100% salute to Francis Ngannou for finessing the PFL, who were desperate to have a former UFC champion and to be able to call him the PFL champion and to hang on to him and try to make him their star. They were desperate for that and they overpaid for it drastically. And that's the thing. It's not about Francis versus UFC. The UFC is looking out for their interests and Francis is looking out for his interests. The UFC, you know, to pay Francis what he's asking for, right? $8 million for a fight against a guy of Hernan Ferreira's caliber is just ridiculous. It's not worth it if you're the UFC. You know, the UFC, it's not like the UFC doesn't have African fighters as well. The UFC has other Nigerian fighters that they could take to Nigeria. They have South African fighters, Dricus du Plessis, their middleweight champion. They have options if they want to go global, which, you know, they're doing. South Africa card is already in the works per Dana White, etc., etc. Francis, I believe, did what's best for himself, but it's not far-fetched to think that he would have made more money in the UFC if you consider the fact that he's got stars to fight in the UFC. You get what I'm saying? Let's say Francis goes out there and he fights John Jones. And let's say he knocks out John Jones cold. That would have been incredible. That would have been trending. That would have been a huge moment in sports, not just in MMA, but in sports. And it would have transcended the MMA bubble. It would have made it to the mainstream. And that right there would catapult Francis to a new level of fame and stardom, etc., etc. Now imagine if he beats Stipe in a trilogy. Imagine if he rematches John Jones and he beats John twice. He's 2-0 on John. 2 knockout losses for John Jones send him back into retirement, right? Imagine if he fights Tom Aspinall, who also has a country behind him, the UK, right? He's got England behind him. Bro, if Francis won those fights, he'd be like, there's no one else. Those are the fights. Those are the million pay-per-view buy fights. Maybe not the Stipe one, right? Obviously not the Stipe one. I mean, the first one had 350,000 pay-per-view buys, so, you know, that one's not cracking a million most likely. But Francis versus John, I think that could get close to a million for sure. And then, you know, Francis versus John too, if Francis was to win the first one. Francis versus Tom Aspinall, I think these fights get close to a million if they don't completely crack a million. You know, 1.1, 1.2 pay-per-view buys. That's a lot of money that's left on the table. There is nobody in the PFL for Francis to fight. There just isn't. So then what do you do if you're the PFL? Do you let him go box? You did that. He's 0-2. I think he should have beaten Tyson Fury personally. Me personally, from these eyes, I thought he won that fight. However, judges didn't see it that way. And then he goes in against Anthony Joshua and he gets sparked, knocked out cold, which isn't good. Not good. Not a good look to have your champion, right? Your king, your heavyweight champion. This isn't the 145-pound champion. It's not the women's division champion. This is the promotion's king, the heavyweight champion. Okay? Knocked out cold, sparked by the boxing heavyweight champion, or a boxing heavyweight, you know. Joshua don't even got a belt, you know. You know what I mean? So it's a bad look. Do you let him go into boxing again and fight Deontay Wilder where he can get knocked out too? Do you let him fight? Who do you let him fight? Andy Ruiz, where he can get clipped behind the head and knocked out the way he knocked out one Anthony Joshua? There's a lot of tough fights for him in boxing. They're fights that I would watch. They're fights that I would be interested in. But it's a risk. It's a big risk. And then you look at the PFL roster. Who is there at heavyweight for Francis to fight? Fedor? You're gonna call Fedor up, you know what I mean, and have like the the whole Bellator thing that they're doing since they purchased Bellator. What are you gonna do? The UFC, in my opinion, had more options for him. Bigger blockbuster fights. You have guys on the come up like Jalton Almeida. You know what I mean? Jalton Almeida, take Francis out, could be champion of the PFL right now. You know, I think he takes down Renan Ferreira, submits him, is what it is. Um, there's nobody for him to fight in the PFL. Could that lead to an upset? Could that lead to him slipping on a banana peel, being arrogant, and, you know, being humbled by MMA, as we've seen many times before? Maybe. Or maybe he just runs the gauntlet and beats up on these people and he's just collecting checks, you know? And the PFL is not making money off it. That's what I predict happening. I predict Francis goes on to have a very successful PFL career. I think the talk about cross promotion will come more. I think they'll try to get Saudi on their side. I think they'll try to get Sheikh Turkey to try to throw money at Dana White to make Francis versus Jones or Francis versus Tom Aspinall. If, let's say, Tom Aspinall gets the undisputed belt at some point and he rattles off 2 or 3, you know, stoppage wins, title defenses, and Francis is doing the same, I think that's the route they'll try to go. I don't think Dana will give in. I don't think he'll budge. He's always said no cross promotion. We don't do cross promotes. They did it with McGregor, though, they did, in fairness, but that was for an ungodly amount of money. Who knows, you know, if Sheikh Turkey's throwing that money around, they may be interested. But that's pretty much all I got on this one, man. I do think Francis Ngannou finessed the PFL, and the PFL is taking an L on this. Not Francis, not the UFC, because, yeah, the UFC lost Francis Ngannou, but they have many others. You know what I mean? They have many others, and it's fine to not overpay to keep Francis. I would rather lose Francis than to overpay Francis what he's making in the PFL and just build stars like Tom Aspinall if you're the UFC. You know what I mean? So that's my take on that. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below, whether you agree, disagree. It doesn't matter. Just join the discussion. Follow for more and leave a like if you enjoyed the time spent. Thank you. You are all appreciated.